Hello everyone, welcome to the first webinar for the online behavior management course called The Importance of Social Emotional Teaching. My name is Corinne Fennelly and I will be your main presenter today. And I'm a senior training specialist at Georgia State University's Best Practices Training, and I'm also the main instructor for this behavior management course. And Suzanne Turner also joins us today as our facilitator. And many of you know her already. She wears many hats, but I know her as the Best Practices Associate Project Director. So here's a little rundown of what to expect for today's webinar. Today's webinar will last about an hour from 3 to 4. There'll be approximately 45 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. You can submit your questions throughout the webinar, and we will do our best to get to all of them during the Q&A session at the end. There is also a note-taking guide for this webinar. You can access it online through Georgia View, so make sure you have that handy. You can follow along throughout the webinar using that note-taking guide. If you have not had a chance to print the note-taking guide yet, no worries. You can do so anytime, even after the webinar ends. This webinar will be archived, so you'll be able to review it later and complete the note-taking guide at that time if you would like. As you may have noticed in your syllabus, there's also a discussion board component to this course. After every webinar, there'll be a discussion board assignment that you will have to complete before the next scheduled webinar. A description of the webinar's discussion board assignment was originally included in the webinar confirmation that you received via email, likely just a few days ago. You can also read a description of the discussion board assignment on Georgia View in the discussion section that's on the left-hand column. So today we will first define what social-emotional skills are. We'll discuss why it is important to teach social-emotional skills in the classroom, and we're going to explore effective strategies and techniques you can use in the classroom to help children learn these skills. Your first assignment, the foundation, was meant to serve as a review for what we're about to discuss. We intentionally included concepts that you should already be implementing in your classroom in that foundation course. So all the information that we'll discuss today is going to build on the foundation component that you just completed. So many things probably come to mind when you think of social-emotional skills in children. I know one important element of healthy social-emotional skills is a child's ability to experience, manage, and express their emotions in a healthy way. This is one reason why it's usually easy for teachers to identify children in their class that have some type of social-emotional delay. Usually, for some reason, these children tend to stand out to us because they lack a particular skill. So the way children handle their emotions usually makes them stand out even more. The second important element of social-emotional skills is the child's ability to explore and engage with the environment around them. And we know, just based on a developmental perspective, that 4- and 5-year-olds are naturally curious and inquisitive. They want to know everything about everything. So if you see them regularly withdraw or disengage from the learning environment, that could indicate a social-emotional problem. The third important element of social-emotional skills is the child's ability to form and sustain positive and healthy relationships with adults as well as other children. This involves children forming healthy bonds with people and learning what behavior is considered socially appropriate in the context of a relationship. When a child has social-emotional skills, it contributes to her ability to succeed in school, and she's much better equipped to show empathy towards others and to make friends. Social-emotional skills impact behavior and how a child views herself and her self-confidence. Overall, the greater the child's social-emotional development, the more resilient they will be when they experience challenges in the classroom as well as outside the classroom in other social environments. Unfortunately, research is confirming that many children under the age of 5 are not learning the social-emotional skills they need to succeed. One landmark study that's fairly recent came out of Yale University that discovered that over 5,000 children were expelled from preschool in just 1 year. That figure is more than 3 times the rate of expulsions in grades K through 12. So the research also uncovered that 1 in 10 preschool children were described by their teachers as having a serious behavioral problem, and that's an astounding number. Research also tells us that when a child has social-emotional delays, they are at greater risk for using challenging behaviors in the classroom. And usually they use these challenging behaviors to get legitimate needs met, but they lack the know-how as far as how to get those needs met appropriately. So take a look at the graphic on your screen. This graphic illustrates the unhealthy cycle that children with delays experience. Look at number 1. The problem starts with a social-emotional delay. That social-emotional problem usually leads children to behave in an inappropriate way. That behavior then causes strain on the child's adult and peer relationships, which you can see on number 3. That social-emotional problem then leads children to behave in more inappropriate ways. Those strained relationships can make social-emotional delays more severe. It exacerbates the problem because the child's not equipped to repair those relationships, which I'm sure you kind of see examples of this in your classroom every day. In the end, all of this leads to escalating challenging behaviors, which leads to those social-emotional delays being sustained. So what's happening to our children long term when they don't learn social-emotional skills? Well, the impact of this is being constantly evaluated through research. Social-emotional development influences all other areas of development. That is one thing that research continues to confirm. Cognitive, language, and motor skills are all affected by how a child feels about himself, how he relates to others around him, and even how he manages and expresses his emotions. So it just makes sense that if a child has unresolved social-emotional deficits, that it makes that child at greater risk of experiencing challenges as a teen and then later as an adult. Some of the common challenges seen are bullying, either because they're the perpetrator or the victim. They drop out of school. They're more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. They're more likely to live in poverty and to engage in some type of criminal activity. Social-emotional skills are not something children are born with, and we have to remind ourselves of this every day we work with them in the classroom. The reason for this is because the most developed part of the brain for children at birth is their brainstem. The limbic system and the frontal lobes develop later. And if you remember back to what we discussed in the foundation course, the limbic system and frontal lobes are the areas of the brain that are responsible for all the reasoning we do, all the problem solving, and our main emotional control. And in fact, specifically, the frontal lobe does not fully develop until someone is in their early 20s. But yet we expect children to be able to use their frontal lobe to be able to help solve problems in the classroom. This is one more reason why children have difficulty doing that at times. Everything the child experiences, especially from birth to age 5, impacts the permanent wiring in his brain. These brain connections can have a positive or negative effect on brain development. When a young child has positive relational experiences, it then reinforces the connections needed in the brain for the development of positive social-emotional skills. The bad news is that you cannot change what children experience before starting pre-K. The good news is that you can impact what they experience when they are with you. You do have control over whether they have positive relational experiences in your classroom or not. That's the good news. Social-emotional skills take time to develop. Like most things, children learn by having social experiences and by having skills modeled to them at home and in the classroom. As a teacher, you need to be very intentional about how you teach social emotional skills and give children opportunities to practice these skills. Expect children to fail sometimes. The development of social emotional skills requires you to be very patient. Let's even explore this from a developmental perspective. Your pre-K children have not had many opportunities to learn and practice social emotional skills. Parallel play can last through age 3 for most typically developing children. So that means that for most children in your class, just about a year ago, they were playing very parallel to one another, very side by side, with little collaboration or cooperation with each other. So all this cooperation and collaboration in your pre-K classroom is relatively new for most of your children. As adults, we have had many years of practice, yet we still handle social emotional situations wrong sometimes, unfortunately. So with pre-K children and their limited insight and experience, they are bound to say and do inappropriate things in social and emotional situations. It would be great if every parent taught their child the social emotional skills they need to succeed. But you have to focus on the things you can control, and you cannot control how a parent raises their child. You are their teacher, not their parent. So that is a very unique and valuable role you play in your children's lives. What would it look like in your classroom if you approached teaching social emotional skills the same way you teach science, math, literacy, or even social studies? If a child doesn't master an academic skill, such as maybe writing her name, after months of trying, a teacher would never roll their eyes, throw their hands up in frustration, call that child names under their breath, or give up on her. But that is what happens, unfortunately, a lot in classrooms when a child cannot master a social emotional skill, say, for example, like controlling their impulses or their anger. If this hits a little close to home, then I really challenge you to change your mindset. Start teaching social emotional skills with the same intentionality, creativity, determination, and objectiveness you use when teaching academic skills in your classroom. As a pre-K teacher, your goal is to teach children the skills they need to be prepared for kindergarten. This includes academic skills and social emotional skills. When a child enters kindergarten, you know that they are expected to do a lot. They're expected to pay attention, follow directions, they're expected to solve problems effectively. When they get frustrated, they're expected to cope in a healthy way. They're expected to get along with others. And research continues to show us that these skills are just as important. Even some experts argue that they're more important than academic skills for future success. So when you start to think about kindergarten preparedness, social emotional skills should be one of the first things that pop into your mind. Think about the strategies that you currently use in your classroom in teaching academic skills. Be prepared to use these same techniques to teach social emotional skills. First, we know that pre-K children learn best when something is repeated, whether it is letters, numbers, days of the week, or months of the year. If it is something important you want the children to learn, you use repetition to help them master it. Unfortunately, we know that extra time is not a luxury that you have in your classroom. The reality is that your daily schedule is already full. So that's why teaching social emotional skills does not require you to rearrange your entire schedule or even block out a certain amount of time each day just to focus on these skills. That wouldn't be realistic, nor would it probably even be most effective. But when you incorporate social emotional skill building into your daily routine, that's what helps you transfer the learning across all activities and environments. And we're going to review specific techniques that you can incorporate into your established daily routine just a bit later in the webinar. Based on their cognitive development, we know that 4 and 5-year-olds think and learn in a very concrete way. Social emotional concepts are too abstract for children. It is important to find ways to make these concepts more concrete for them. For example, emotions are difficult for children to understand. It's especially difficult for them to make connections between what they feel and how they act. Using props like feeling faces, pictures, posters, books, mirrors, even things like dolls and puppets can make emotions and feelings more concrete for pre-K children. In fact, if you ask a pre-K child what it means to be happy, for example, they're more likely to start describing things in their life rather than the concept of a feeling. They might say that presents make them happy or puppies make them happy, things of that sort. They're going to start to relate it to something that's concrete in their life to help them make sense of that feeling. Like teaching a child to count, you need to reinforce social-emotional learning throughout the day. Noticing children's positive behaviors is one way to reinforce these skills. This also helps children know what they are doing right instead of what they're doing wrong. You can reinforce learning by providing frequent opportunities for them to practice what you're teaching them. Look at the example on the screen. In this example, the teacher reminds Jasmine how to use her words when she wants to see what Michael drew instead of just grabbing or snatching his paper away. Jasmine, remember what we talked about this morning? Use your words when you want something. You could accidentally tear his picture or hurt Michael if you grab like that. Instead, you can say, Michael, can I please see your picture? So in this example, the teacher's having to help Jasmine remember a previous conversation they had about this particular issue. And she also models to her what she can say so she can start to use her words instead of snatching. A lesson plan helps you be intentional about what and how you teach. That's why you have a lesson plan every day. But the same principle applies to how you teach social-emotional skills. You need to plan ahead so you can be intentional and effective. Social-emotional skills are difficult to teach on the spur of the moment unless you do have a good game plan. When you plan, focus your attention on helping children understand feelings, control their anger and impulses, and help them cope with stress and solve problems. Self-management is the term used to describe a child's ability to eventually put these skills into practice with minimal intervention from you. And that should be your end goal, to equip children to be able to manage their own behavior in the future. We're about to move forward to talk about some individualized strategies for teaching social-emotional skills. As we go through this, I know on the note-taking guide there's a lot of information that you're completing. Definitely don't stress about it. As a reminder, this webinar will be archived, so you can go back at any point and revisit some points that you want to complete on your note-taking guide, as well as even revisit some points that you want to get more information about. And I also remind you to please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar instead of waiting to the very end. That way we can make sure that we can get to most of the questions in the allotted time frame. Okay, so let's start to look at some individualized strategies that you can use in the classroom. With the right support, most children in your classroom can learn self-management fairly easily. But sometimes there are children that need more individualized support and strategies. You can adapt strategies to assist the entire class, or they can be tailored to use with individual children. But just remember that the tools we're about to review are only effective if you teach children how and when to use them. If you spring up particular strategies suddenly to children, they will not likely get them. You have to be prepared to teach them the same way you teach as academic skills to make sure they get the concept and are able to apply it. So first, let's take a closer look at how you can teach and reinforce coping skills. First, you might have to start with making coping skills concrete. Use visuals and cues to remind children of healthy ways of coping. Give them reminders of things they can do to calm down when they're upset. A visual like this choice board can be used in your safe place. It gives children the option of choosing which item they will use to help them calm down. If you've ever tried to break a bad habit before, you know that it's hard to stop unhealthy behavior without putting something healthier in its place. It's just our human nature to always resort back to the behavior that feels the most comfortable to us, even if we know it's not good for us. And children are the same way. This is why it's usually not effective just to tell a child to stop hitting, kicking, or even to stop yelling or biting. If that is how they have learned to cope and express frustration, you need to provide them with more positive behavioral alternatives. Otherwise, they'll always resort back to that negative behavior. You can start by providing a safe outlet for children. Like in this example. This is an example of a safe outlet for children that like to throw things. And you can set up target practice. You start by making a target, you hang it on the wall, and you provide soft, small beanbags for them to throw at the target. A small basket on the floor can catch the beanbags after the child is done throwing them. A lot of children in your class will just experience this as a fun game, and they'll want to do it just because it's a fun activity. But your aggressive children can use it proactively before they get upset, or they can use it as an outlet when they start to have those aggressive urges. The same principle applies to children that like to kick when they are upset. Kicking a ball, empty box, pillow, or even something soft like a beanbag is much safer than kicking a person or other materials in the classroom. In fact, if you have a child that's really aggressive, something that's been effective in the past is when you're out on the playground with them, line up as many kicking balls as you can about 5 to 6 feet away from a fence and have them kick the ball against the fence. The ball bounces right back to them so they can kick it over and over and over again. This is also an effective strategy used for your very energetic children who are very active as well. Tearing or shredding paper is also a very simple therapeutic technique your children can use when they feel mad or overwhelmed. You can start by keeping a stack of scrap paper or magazines, or even if you have a bunch of old newspapers handy. And when you see warning signs that a child is starting to escalate, give them some of the paper and tell them to tear it into as many pieces as possible. But word of advice, though, keep in mind that you always want to make sure you have a bowl, box, or some type of bucket to put the scraps of paper in, or they're going to end up all over your floor. Another great time to use tearing and shredding is when you see two children or a group of children escalating into an argument. Invite them all as a group to the table to shred paper, and usually by the time they're done, they had a good outlet for all their strong emotions, and they completely forget why they're upset to begin with. Yelling and shouting in the classroom are definitely common ways for children to express frustration. We see it all the time in classrooms. Mad jars are easy to make using an empty plastic jar with a plastic lid. And you can decorate it in a way that will appeal to your children, and in fact, if you get them to help you decorate, even better. And you can use it as a concrete way for children to get all their mad out by screaming their mad feelings into the jar. And once they scream all their mad into the jar, you screw that lid on, and all their mad is in the jar. It can't come back out into your classroom. Or some teachers, they like to use inexpensive PVC pipe for children to yell into. It can sometimes muffle the noise, so it's a little more bearable, and even some children like to imagine this curved piece of PVC pipe as a phone, and they imagine that they're calling someone to talk to when they're upset. You can keep both of these items in your safe place if you have one, so children have it accessible when they are upset. Another tool you could use to help children cope is called a social story. Scripted social stories are stories written by you, the teacher, and they are used to address a specific skill the child needs to learn. Social stories describe options and expectations to help children make good social choices. They can be as simple or elaborate or as creative as you want, depending on how extensive you want to get and how long you want your story to be. You have tips on how to create a social story in your note-taking guide, so feel free to refer to that later if you choose to use this strategy. And the example on your screen is a simple story written to help Jacob make better choices when interacting with his friends. When you write a social story, make sure you write it from the child's perspective and include how you think that child thinks and feels about the specific situation. This is not just helpful to the child, but this is also good for you to explore. Sometimes we get stuck in evaluating a social situation just from our teacher perspective, but it's also very helpful for us to put ourselves in the child's shoes to see what they perhaps could be experiencing from their point of view. Make sure you also use developmentally appropriate images and pictures to make it engaging. And you don't have to get real fancy with this stuff. You could use simple clip art on your computer. You could cut out pictures from magazines or old stories you're going to throw away. As long as the picture is appropriate for the message you're trying to send, that's what matters. You can provide examples of socially appropriate behavior and what the expectation is in the classroom. This reinforces in a positive way that you believe the child is capable of making that good choice. And always include how other people think and feel too. This builds the child's capacity to feel empathy and helps remind them that their choices impact other people. Another important skill children need to be taught is how to problem solve. Children often do not see the options they have when solving problems or conflicts. Without your help, your children will likely respond to conflict in an emotional and impulsive way. So this is a great example of how to make problem solving more concrete for your children. On the screen, you see 4 steps to problem solving. This is an example that was found on a website for the Center on Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning. We call it CEFL for short because it's such a long title. But you have access to this problem solving visual if you go to their website. And the website is listed in multiple places in your handout. The website is on the bottom of your screen. It's also in your note-taking guide in the problem-solving section, as well as in your resource section on the back, on the last page of the note-taking guide. But by breaking the process of problem-solving down into separate steps, this helps children be less impulsive and helps them start to think before they react. So step number 1 is, what is my problem? Help children identify what the problem is. Step number 2 is to help them think of some solutions. Step number 3, get them in the habit of asking, what would happen if I use this solution? Then step number 4, give it a try. They will definitely need your help applying these steps to their daily conflicts, even after you extensively teach them. So get them in the habit of evaluating whether a solution would be an effective one or not. They can start to get in the habit of asking themselves questions like, would this solution be safe? Would the solution be fair? And how would everyone feel if I did this solution? If you prefer, you can also use the turtle technique to teach problem-solving skills. This is very fun for children because it gives you the opportunity to use a turtle puppet to reinforce the turtle's problem-solving steps. And usually children just love to use a prop or a puppet. It's as concrete as you can get when it comes to helping them problem solve. So just like the previous problem-solving steps, you can print out these visuals as well from the CEFL's website. And again, that website's at the bottom of your screen and listed in this section of your note-taking guide. But a good idea is to always place these visuals with the turtle puppet in a safe place or cozy corner to make sure it's accessible. When a child's experiencing a conflict, you want to make sure all these strategies are at their fingertips. So step number 1 for the turtle technique is to recognize that you feel angry. In this step, you want to help children identify what their feelings are. It might not be anger, it might be jealousy, it might be embarrassment, it might be sadness, but you get them in the habit of identifying what their feeling is. Step number 2 is to get them to stop and think. This helps them be less impulsive. Step number 3 is for them to go into their shell, take 3 deep breaths, and think calm coping thoughts. Essentially, this is helping them stop and calm down in order to help them think more clearly. And of course, when you're teaching this to children, feel free to change the language that you use to help them understand. Some children don't understand what calm coping thoughts are, but they do understand the concept of happy thoughts or thoughts that make them happy. So you can change the verbiage and the phrasing to help them understand. Step number 4 is to come out of their shell when calm and think of a solution. Remember that these tools are still going to be most effective when you repeat them and incorporate them into your child's daily routine. You also want to use concrete visuals and examples and reinforce these skills when you see children using them. Look at this example on your screen. When teaching children how to use the turtle technique, this teacher printed out visuals from the website in different sizes so they could be used in different ways throughout their day. The large pictures she used to hang on the wall, and the smaller pictures she put on a key ring so she could place them and put them in a safe place, or she could take them out on the playground or on field trips with her. She's able to transport them more easily than the big pages. She also displays the turtle technique steps on the wall right underneath the classroom rules. This way the children can review the steps on a daily basis and they can start to associate them with positive behavior. Another idea is to add a problem solver helper to your classroom job or helper board. The problem solver helper is responsible for helping other children resolve problems and helps move children towards self-management. The problem solver helper learns through helping others. That's the whole goal. You will be absolutely amazed at how many problems the problem solver helper will be able to assist with without ever getting you involved. Always be prepared to observe, though, what is going on so you can reinforce positive solutions, and you also have to be prepared to step in and assist if necessary, because not every problem will be able to be solved by the problem solver. They'll occasionally need your assistance in making a good decision. A solution kit is another great concrete way to help children resolve conflicts with others and solve problems. A solution kit is a very inexpensive and easy, and it's very easy to make. It starts with just an empty container. It could be as simple as a plastic storage box, or if you have an empty picnic basket, briefcase. You can even use a bag or binder. If you want to go a smaller route, you can even use a used recipe box. After you have your container, next you want to create your own solution cards, or you can print out solutions like these that you have on your screen from the CEFL website. You can place the cards in your container of choice, and then you use the solution kit to help children know what their options are. It also encourages them to make good choices. So here's a closer look at some solution ideas from the CEFA website. And you see, it's a good idea to always teach these solutions. And you want to start by modeling these solutions to your children and then have them practice while you observe them. This way, everybody knows what the solution means and what they look like in the classroom. Otherwise, more difficult concepts, kind of like trading or ignoring, they can be misused or overlooked. And just as an example, when I was trying to teach this to a little girl in a classroom, I was trying to teach her the concept of ignoring someone that was bothering her. And she got the concept so much that when I was trying to call her name to get her attention one day, she was ignoring me. And when I went up and approached her about it, she said, "Well, you told me to ignore someone who bothers me." So just an example of how they can use that against you if it's not taught how to use properly. So make sure you teach them how to use these solutions in an effective way. And just as a reminder, you can access these particular solutions from the CEFA website if you like the ones that you see. Understanding feelings is another important social-emotional skill. In fact, some experts refer to this skill as emotional literacy. It's important for children to learn that feelings can change and that they can have more than one feeling at a time. This is usually pretty confusing at first to a child. They have a hard time understanding that they can be mad and sad at the same time, for example. Children also need to understand that it is okay to feel differently from someone else, and that children have different experiences. But no matter what, they need to know that all feelings are legitimate, even negative feelings. That it's okay to feel mad, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel jealous, but it's most important how a child expresses these feelings. The best way to be concrete when teaching emotions is to use feeling faces. You can create your own, or you can print out ones that are already done for you. The ones on the screen that you see are also from the CEFA website, but there are many various resources for feeling faces. There are many ones that you can purchase or download for free. Or if you're very artistic, like I said, you can create your own. Better yet, you can even have children pose. Children in your class love making feeling faces just for fun, and you can capture those poses and display them on your bulletin board, and then you have them available to be using as a teaching tool later on. You can display feeling posters or signs in your safe place, or you can even feel free to display these anywhere around your room so children can refer to them throughout your day. You can also personalize activities for children and help them apply the information to their own lives. So what one teacher did is she had each child make a picture display of what it meant for them to feel proud. So this was not only fun for the children, but it also was a good assessment tool for the teacher to be able to see whether the child really understood the feeling of feeling proud. Large and small groups are great opportunities to explore emotions. This teacher did a language experience chart in which she had children check in and report how they were feeling. If you do this activity, though, make sure that you have pictures of feeling faces for the children to refer to at that time. Otherwise, all the children might be tempted to all choose the same feeling. So you make sure you have those feeling faces for reference for them. Another way for teachers and children to check in each morning or afternoon is by choosing a feeling face that best describes their current mood and place it next to their name or picture. You can see in this particular display they're able to put the picture of the feeling next to the picture of the child. And then you can encourage children to change their feeling faces throughout the day as their moods change. As far as teaching feelings, you can really just let your creative juices flow. That really the sky's the limit. You can think of creative games about feelings, like for example, you can even do feelings bingo. Here's a feeling wheel that you can easily make using visuals from the CEPL website, or again, if you're creative, you can create your own visuals. But you and the children spin and role play whatever feeling the arrow lands on. But just a tip, anytime you role play with a 4 or 5-year-old, especially when you're having them role play something as personal as an emotion, they usually role play better when they use puppets or dolls versus role playing with another child or you, for example. So make sure you have those puppets and dolls handy when you do role playing with your children. An inexpensive resource that you already have at your fingertips is books. Most children's books have social-emotional themes that you can use to help children understand social dynamics better. So use the books that you already have and start a dialogue about how the children can relate to the characters in the story. You can ask questions about how they think the character feels, maybe even talk about the decisions that the character made. In this picture, you see a teacher. She is using the book that we've all heard of, the Glad Monster, Sad Monster book, and she's also using a feelings wheel in small group with the book. Art is a very effective way for children to learn about emotions and to express their own feelings in a healthy way. Self-expression through art can be very therapeutic for many children, and it's actually a tool that many child counselors use to promote social-emotional development. So this is very handy for children that tend to get easily overwhelmed with their feelings, to have them proactively draw and color things that evoke those feelings in them. So we've talked a lot about different strategies, a lot about different techniques to use in the classroom. One thing to keep in mind is that anytime you're teaching a child a new social-emotional skill, it's very important to notify parents when you start using a technique that appears to be helpful. This is especially true if you're working with a child that experiences chronic social-emotional or behavioral problems. You want to explain what you are doing to the parents, your rationale for doing it, and the type of results you're getting. And this way, the parents stay informed, and it's a good way to try to get their buy-in so they perhaps will feel comfortable getting on board with those strategies and techniques that you're using. Here's an example of one teacher. She tried to get the parents on board with the turtle technique that she was using, and so the way she decided to do it was to write a letter. And you see the sample letter on your screen. And in this letter, you'll notice that Ms. Lauren reinforces learning by celebrating Justin's positive behavior with the parents. So many times parents are used to getting negative reports home, especially if their child has chronic behavior problems, that it's really refreshing to the parent to actually get a notice of something that their child did really well. So this letter does that. It celebrates the behavior. In this letter, Ms. Lauren also suggests ways that they can reinforce problem solving at home. Now, depending on the parents, you know, some are going to love letters like this, and some are going to be super excited about ways to support you in the classroom. But unfortunately, we know a lot of other parents may not even read the letter. They may toss it in the trash or leave it in the child's book bag for forever. But regardless of what type of parent you're working with, still send the letter home and place a copy of the letter in the child's file. Because what this does is it lets the parent know what you are doing to intervene with that child in the classroom. And it also shows that you're focused on the positive things that that child is doing, not just the negative. And hopefully parents will perceive it as a way, as a positive way to get them involved in your efforts in the classroom as well. So lastly, here's a list of some of the resources that you have in the resource section of your note-taking guide. These resources, they're just full of great articles. They're free. A lot of these resources has visuals that you can download, such as the Conscious Discipline website, as well as the Center on Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning. There's also a lot of great information on the NAEYC website and the Better Brains for Babies website that you can pass on to parents, so you can help educate and equip parents so they get a better understanding of the importance of social emotional development as well. A lot of times parents have an old-fashioned view of school readiness, and they just focus on academic skills as well. And they might perceive some of the behavioral issues going on with the child as more cute or endearing. And you can help communicate to the parents via these resources kind of what is developmentally appropriate for children at 4 and 5 years old to help educate and equip them. Okay, so now we are on our questions and answers period. And like I mentioned, we're going to do our best to address each of your questions. So I apologize in advance if we run out of time, depending on how lengthy these answers need to be. The first one of the questions is, why should I spend time teaching working on social emotional skills? Don't the parents need to do that? And yes, you are absolutely right. Parents should, in a perfect world, be teaching their child social emotional skills. But again, if we're looking at this from the same perspective as we approach academic skills, if a parent does not read to a child, let's say, it's recommended that a parent read to their child every night at bedtime in order to increase literacy skills. But let's say a parent doesn't read to their child. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't not read to the children in the classroom just because a parent isn't reading to their child at home. In fact, because the parent isn't reading to a child at home, that reinforces even more why we should be reading to them in the classroom. So that same philosophy applies to social emotional skills. That, again, in a perfect world, yes, parents should be invested in teaching their children these skills. But we don't know if they are getting these skills at home. And especially if they're not, that increases our responsibility even more to make sure they're getting it with us in the classroom, because that might be the only place they're ever exposed to positive social emotional skills. So I hope that answers your question, and that example of mine makes sense. It's very frustrating to work with parents that aren't on board when it comes to teaching social emotional skills. But I think even if you pulled a bunch of kindergarten teachers, in fact, that's what one of the resources did, is a recent research study pulled hundreds and hundreds of kindergarten teachers around the nation and asked them what skills they thought were most important for incoming kindergartners, and across the board, kindergarten teachers were ranking social emotional skills as the most important skills they wanted their kindergartners to have. Because it doesn't matter how smart a child is, if they can't pay attention, if they can't follow simple directions, if they can't get along with others, that even though they could be very intelligent, the lack of those social emotional skills will eventually, inevitably interfere with their ability to learn. Okay, the second question is, how do I explain to parents whose children are being hurt by an aggressive child? We are working with him, but progress is slow. Well, I tend to use the example of how we would approach someone with learning. Now, a child's learning problem doesn't impact other children like a child's behavior problem does. So that's definitely understood. However, you can approach it with a parent as if from the perspective of every child learns differently, every child develops differently. And in that case, I usually provide concrete information about what I am doing when that happens to protect their child, because that is a parent's true concern. They might be curious about who's hurting their child, and they might be kind of nosy as far as what's going on with that child who's having problems, but really what they want to know is, are you keeping my child safe? And that's what you can reassure them of. They don't have to know everything that you're doing with the child that has the problem. In fact, for confidentiality reasons, you probably have to be very careful about what information you give them. But you can reassure them as far as what you are doing and what classroom procedure or policy you have in place to make sure that you keep their child safe while you're teaching these skills to the other child. Okay, another question is, how do you handle parents who also have issues with their social emotional development? So I'm assuming that this means that parents who also have concerns about the social emotional development of their child. Or maybe, okay, so this is in regards to parents lacking some social emotional skills themselves. And then in that particular case, and honestly, I think this is actually a good scenario. A lot of parents lack social emotional skills themselves, but they don't have the insight to know it. And so the fact that if you work with a parent that has enough insight to know that they have social emotional problems themselves, then you can build on that. I would work on developing a really close relationship with that parent, develop a connection with that parent to the point that you could potentially share community resources so they can work on their social emotional skills. Don't attempt to be their counselor. I wouldn't even attempt to be their confidant or their friend, because then that crosses a professional boundary of yours. But you could be kind of equipped to give them some professional resources in the community so they can work on their own social emotional development and encourage them to do so for the sake of their child. Okay, the question says, doesn't giving them something to throw encourage throwing? I don't want them to throw, I want them to stop. What if kicking increases their negative emotions? Very good question. And again, ideally in a perfect world, you would want to control the behavior and stop throwing altogether. That's why you don't use any one of these strategies in isolation. Because as you're teaching a child to throw a beanbag instead of a block, you are also teaching that child how to express emotions in a healthy way with words. You're also teaching them perhaps using the turtle technique to solve a problem. You're maybe using the solution kit to help them think through problems and be less impulsive. So ideally, yes, your goal would be to get children to not be aggressive and to not throw, not kick, or anything like that. But in the small amount of time that you have that child, the most you might be able to do is to redirect their throwing or kicking behavior into at least something less dangerous as you're teaching them the social emotional skills they need to stop hitting and kicking altogether. Okay, one question is, how do I deal with biting? Well, I usually handle biting the same way I handle aggression. Is biting for a 4- and 5-year-old usually happens out of extreme frustration and due to a lack of verbal skills. Now that may vary from child to child, since I don't know this particular child personally. But you would handle biting the same way you would handle aggression. You want to give them an outlet for those aggressive urges. You also want to equip them with emotional literacy, again, so they have the words to be able to verbalize their emotions. They would, a child who bites definitely typically benefits from a safe place. They also typically benefit from those coping visual cue cards, or even a calm kit or safe place kit that was mentioned in the foundation course. You are essentially trying to replace the biting with other things they can do as a healthier, safer outlet while you're giving them the skills they need to express their emotions in a healthy way. Another question is, how long should I try a technique before giving up or getting outside help? This tends to vary based on the severity of the child's behavior problem. With a child who has a diagnosable problem, for example, perhaps they have an IEP, you want to wait longer. The more severe the problem, the more time you will need to implement it and have it be effective. I typically advise teachers to wait at least 4 weeks to see whether there's any improvement whatsoever, and to document every day or every time you implement that strategy, discuss in that documentation what you did as well as what the result was, so you can keep track so one day doesn't blur into the next. But I'd at least do 4 weeks, longer if that child has an IEP or has a more severe behavioral problem. And also just a warning, a lot of behavior will get worse before it gets better. Because like I mentioned, bad habits do die hard, and a lot of children are resistant to change, just like adults are. And so you might face some resistance, and you might have to work through that with the child before they are accepting of this new alternative. And let's just face it, there's a lot of adults that still have problems facing their emotions. So we have to, again, be patient with our children, knowing that they have much less frame of reference than we do. They have much less experience and practice doing this than we do. And so when we approach them with a new way of doing things, they might they're going to be resistant at first, especially if they have a severe behavior problem. Where can I find images to use for picture cues? Well, really, clip art is great. Even Google Images is great. Just things that are free. You can even use magazine cutouts. There's really no wrong or right for those images. Again, children are usually less picky than we are. Our standards are usually pretty higher with how something looks. As long as it conveys, as long as the image conveys the point, it doesn't matter how fancy it is. So I would use Google Images, magazines, and clip art. There's also a question about programs like Second Step. I'm a huge advocate of programs like Second Step. If your pre-K program or your school or child care facility is able and willing to invest in a program like Second Steps, then I definitely advocate for that. Now, I don't advocate necessarily for just Second Steps. There's many anti-violence, anti-bullying, anti-aggression type of curriculums that exist. Second Steps is just one of the many ones that are evidence-based. But definitely, I recommend that anytime you can have a curriculum specifically for building these skills, then that's a very good situation to be in. Okay, I have another question about kind of related to helping children that are nonverbal to express emotions, and along the same lines, getting a child who is an English language learner to communicate their feelings as well. And similar answers, but there are a couple different things, so I'll address them separately. First, for the child who is nonverbal, you would want to start with using symbols first with that child. So I would use, I would kind of follow along the lines of getting images from Google or clip art or magazines and start with that. You can even use feeling faces. So if a child can't verbalize that they're feeling mad, they could at least point to the mad face. Art therapy or doing artwork as an expression of feelings it's a fantastic technique for nonverbal children as well as children that don't speak English very well. For children that do not speak English, you want to learn some of the language, some of the words in their own language. So you'd want to learn what the feeling words were in their native language and use some of those as well as the English words to start to enhance their understanding. Also, that's just naturally going to build your connection with that child. When they hear you speaking some of their native language, they're going to feel like somebody understands them, and they'll be more likely to come to you when they're upset if you start to use some of those words. So you can even use those words when you create visuals. You can use the English word as well as the word in their native language as well as a visual image. Use all three for those children that do not speak English well. But definitely for your nonverbal children, you want to use as many visuals, pictures, symbols as possible to get them in the habit of expressing their emotions. Social stories would be great for your nonverbal children as well. This other question says, would you read social stories in large group? And absolutely. If that social story is something that the majority of your children can relate to, definitely. In fact, you could have separate social stories for individual children having particular issues. And then if there's a classroom-wide issue that you're addressing, perhaps it's using kind words or being helpful to one another, you could definitely write a social story related to that particular topic and read it in large group as well. Very good idea. And can I use them without having an IEP? Yes, 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 yes. A social story is something that even parents can use at home. In fact, what we usually advise is if you have a social story about a particular issue for a child experiencing a behavior problem, if you can, make a second copy and give it to mom and dad so they can read that social story at home as well. So social stories are convenient, they're easy to make, and they can be used for children with minor issues as well as severe behavioral problems. Another question asks, are individual behavior plans appropriate for pre-K? And yes, they are if the behavior warrants a behavior plan. An individual behavior plan is just essentially a way to make sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to what is being done to intervene with this child. It's kind of like that lesson plan that you have for all your academic skills. It helps keep you on track. It helps monitor progress, and if something needs to be changed because an intervention is not working, then that's an easy way to have that change documented. So yes, they can be appropriate for pre-K as long as they're being appropriately implemented and used. We have a couple more questions, and Suzanne's going to come over and address some of these more general pre-K questions for you.
Hi everybody, I'm glad to be here. One teacher asked about the tearing paper activity and could it count as a sensory table activity. What you have to remember about the sensory table is that the primary purpose of that is to have things in that table that children can scoop and pour and measure. So tearing paper, while it's a great sensory activity, probably would not be something that I would replace sand or water or something like that in the sensory table with. There's no reason you couldn't have that, though, as a separate activity for children. It's certainly fine motor. It really helps in a lot of ways. But remember, the intent of the sensory table, it's in your science section. So it's for children to be able to scoop and pour and measure. This is asking about the safe place and the display in there counting as children's display. Remember that when you talk about the display in the classroom, you want to be sure that you include children's unique creative efforts. So while the display in the safe place is really important, I would not count that as children's display. One of the things that I thought of too, and I'll throw this in, when Corinne was talking and showing you all the really good feeling faces that you could use with children, the really simple line drawings really struck me, and it really reminded me of Mo Willems and all of his pigeon books, particularly Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. Those are really great examples of feelings, and he does such a marvelous job of illustrating frustration and all of those sort of complicated feelings with very simple drawings. So that's a great book to read with children to talk about expressions and how they convey feelings and emotions.
Okay, well that concludes our first webinar. We thank you for taking the time to join us today. And just as a reminder, this webinar will be archived. It will be approximately about 48 hours from today that it will be archived, so it won't be available immediately, but you could check a couple days from now if you know of someone that's going to be viewing it later on. And also feel free to download that note-taking guide as well. And and you can go back and revisit some points and fill in some blanks if the webinar progressed faster than you were able to use to fill in those blanks. Also, just as a reminder, the discussion board assignment is posted in the discussion section on Georgia View, and that includes providing 2 strategies and examples of things you're doing in the classroom to teach social emotional skills, as well as providing 2 posts or comments on or providing feedback about other people's posts. But that assignment is clearly written in the discussion section on Georgia View. But thanks again, and I look forward to speaking to you next time.